The sun was beginning to sink low over Goo Lagoon, painting the ocean in soft gold and orange. The waves rolled lazily onto the sand, each one stretching a little further before retreating with a sigh. Inside the open-air gym, the air was warm but gentle, carrying the faint scent of salt and seaweed. Larry the Lobster stood by the window, his red shell glimmering in the last light of day. The dumbbells beside him clinked softly as he placed them down, careful not to disturb the quiet that had settled over the beach. His breathing slowed, the rise and fall of his chest matching the rhythm of the waves. For once there was no crowd watching, no music blasting from speakers, no sound of competitive shouting or clanging metal, just stillness. The kind that made every small sound a seagull's distant cry, the flutter of a loose towel feel gentle and alive. Larry wiped his brow with a faded blue towel, then draped it carefully over the rack. His reflection looked back at him from a hanging mirror, strong, proud, but softened by the sunset. For the first time all day, he let himself smile, not the confident grin he gave during contests or flex-offs, but a quiet one, the kind that comes when everything feels right and calm. He walked toward the open windows where the breeze drifted through the slats. It carried the cool promise of night, the faint chatter of beachgoers heading home, and the echo of laughter far away. He leaned on the window frame, gazing out at the shimmering horizon. The light spread across the water like liquid gold, turning the surface into a moving canvas of warmth. Larry inhaled deeply, the air filling his chest with salt and peace. "End of another day," he murmured softly to himself. His voice didn't echo, it blended with the sounds of the ocean, like it belonged there. Behind him, the gym looked almost dreamlike. Rows of weights glowed faintly, their metal edges catching the amber lights. Resistance bands hung still, their shadows long and thin across the floor. The punching bag swayed ever so slightly as if moved by the same breeze that rippled through the curtains. He walked past each station slowly, almost like a ritual. The treadmill, the bench press, the pull-up bar, each one a part of his day, a rhythm, a meditation. But now, as twilight arrived, he let them rest. Larry reached for his water bottle and took a small sip. The water was cool, refreshing, and he could taste the faint minerals like the ocean itself was calming his body. A tiny crab scuttled across the floor near the doorway. Larry smiled again, crouching down. "Hey there, little guy," he whispered. "You're still working this late?" The crab paused, waved a claw, and disappeared out the open door. Larry chuckled softly, standing again. He looked out once more at Goo Lagoon. The last rays of the sun were dipping below the coral cliffs, and the sky was beginning to turn lavender, then deep blue. The world seemed to exhale. For a long, peaceful moment, he stood there doing nothing at all, just breathing. The soft hum of the lights above mixed with the sound of the ocean. The air shifted slightly cooler now, brushing across his arms like a whisper. A towel hanging from the rack fluttered once, then settled. Larry turned off the main lights, one switch at a time. The room dimmed into gold and shadow, each corner wrapped in gentle twilight. Only the glow from the outside remained, bathing everything in that perfect sunset calm. He placed his claw gently on the gym sign near the door, a habit, a goodbye. "See you tomorrow, buddy," he said softly, as if speaking to an old friend. Outside, the sand gleamed like powdered amber. The waves shimmered quietly, and somewhere in the distance, the soft music from a tiki stand drifted through the breeze, a faint ukulele tune, echoing through the twilight. Larry took one last deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs and settle deep inside. It wasn't about strength now. It wasn't about winning or competing. It was about calm, about balance, about the soft rhythm that lived beneath every crashing wave. And as he stepped outside, the golden horizon welcomed him with silence. As Larry stepped out of the gym, the sand welcomed him with a soft crunch beneath his feet. The warmth of the day still lingered in the grains, radiating a faint, fading heat that felt comforting. The salty air swirled around him, carrying traces of sunscreen, driftwood, and the last whispers of laughter from distant beachgoers packing up for the evening. He paused just outside the door, resting a claw on the wooden frame. The gym behind him glowed faintly through its windows, a single lantern light flickering inside, left as a quiet reminder that even in rest, the place still breathed. The sun was lower now, halfway tucked beneath the horizon. The ocean looked like a sheet of molten light, moving in soft ripples. The breeze played with the corners of Larry's towel, and the fabric fluttered gently like a flag of peace. He started walking slowly down the shoreline, his heavy steps leaving deep impressions in the sand that filled back in with the next wave. Each footfall matched the rhythm of the water's edge. Step, wash, breathe, repeat. Somewhere nearby, a few jellyfish floated lazily near the shallows, their translucent bodies glowing faintly with the last hints of sunlight. Larry watched them drift, admiring their slow, graceful motion. They didn't rush. They didn't push against the tide. They just moved with it. He smiled quietly. Maybe that's the real workout, he said under his breath, learning to flow instead of fight. The tide crept closer, reaching his feet and tickling the edge of his claws. The cool sensation spread warmth through him, not from heat, but from calm. He bent down, scooped up a small seashell, and rolled it between his claws. It was smooth, pale pink, shaped like a tiny heart. He turned it over thoughtfully before placing it back in the sand. "Keep growing, little one," he murmured. His voice was soft, almost lost to the waves. As the sky shifted from orange to violet, the reflections grew gentler. The water shimmered like a living mirror, catching the faint light from tiki torches now being lit along the beach huts in the distance. Larry's reflection appeared on the wet sand, his silhouette long and calm. He didn't look like the competitive lifeguard or the muscle hero everyone knew. Tonight he was just another soul by the sea, watching the world slow down. A pelican glided by overhead, its wings outstretched, gliding smoothly across the fading light. Larry followed it with his eyes, then looked back to the horizon. He could see the line where the sun and water met that golden edge where everything seemed to dissolve into peace. He took a deep breath and stretched his arms out, the joints in his shell clicking softly. His muscles, usually tight and ready, now relaxed completely. He felt the air move through him as if the ocean's rhythm had synced with his own. The beach was almost empty now. Just a few distant figures, silhouettes walking side by side, leaving the footprints that the waves gently erased. The sound of a ukulele floated on the breeze again, joined by the low hum of crickets starting their night song. Larry sat down on the sand, cross-legged, his towel still draped over one shoulder. He ran his claws through the sand, feeling its coolness seep into his skin. Tiny particles stuck to his shell and sparkled faintly in the twilight. He didn't mind. It felt grounding, real. He looked back at the gym, a sturdy outline against the fading orange glow. For years it had been his temple, the place where he pushed himself, trained, chased strength. But now he was learning something new, the strength that comes from stillness. He thought of SpongeBob, always cheerful and clumsy, of Sandy, always striving to improve, of the friends who made life bright. But here, alone at dusk, he realized how much he enjoyed these quiet moments. The kind where nothing needed to happen. The kind where simply being was enough. The waves lapped closer again, brushing against his legs. The water shimmered faintly with bits of bioluminescent algae, soft green sparkles dancing over the surface. Larry watched in awe as each movement of the tide created a tiny constellation of light beneath his claws. Nature's own nightlights, he whispered, chuckling softly. The world around him had slowed into a perfect calm. The horizon was now a gentle blur of gold and purple, stars beginning to peek through a bave. The first evening breeze brushed past him, cool and refreshing, lifting the scent of salt and seagrass. He leaned back on his hands and let his head tilt toward the sky. "You did good today," he said softly to himself. "Now just rest." The ocean responded with a slow, steady wave, rolling up to meet him and then retreating again, as if agreeing. And so Larry sat there, the last rays of the sun fading behind him, the ocean before him, breathing slow and steady. The day had ended, but something new had begun, a rhythm of peace, pulsing gently beneath the waves. The sunlight had all but vanished now, replaced by a cool violet glow stretching across the horizon. Goo Lagoon had transformed no longer the bright, bustling beach of the afternoon, but a hushed, glowing dreamscape. The gym behind Larry was now just a soft outline, its lantern flickering like a heartbeat in the distance. Larry sat quietly, watching the waves roll in and out, the rhythm matching the slow pace of his breathing. The sound of the ocean wasn't just in his ears, it seemed to move through him, sinking with the steady pulse beneath his shell. A few glowing plankton danced near the shallows, their light rising and fading like underwater stars. Larry watched them with the soft wonder of someone seeing the sea for the first time again. Every flicker felt alive, purposeful, calm. The breeze had cooled, wrapping around him like a blanket of ocean air. He folded his arms loosely across his chest, his towel slipping down one side, brushing the sand. It didn't bother him. Nothing did. In moments like this, his thoughts weren't loud or heavy. They just floated slow, weightless. He thought about all the years of training, the competitions, the shouts of encouragement, the roar of the crowd at Goo Lagoon events. It had been exciting, sure, but in the quiet between those moments, he realized how much he'd missed this feeling. Peace. He smiled softly, gazing out at the water. The moon had risen a perfect pearl above the horizon, its reflection trembling gently across the surface of the waves. The light caught on the edges of his shell, giving it a faint, silvery outline. For a second, Larry almost didn't recognize himself. He looked softer. Still strong, yes, but not in a way that needed proving. The muscles, the workouts, the challenges, they were all just part of the rhythm. What mattered most now was the stillness between each beat of the tide. He reached down and drew a line in the sand with one claw. The sand parted easily, a tiny trench glowing faintly in the moonlight. He traced waves, circles, and spirals patterns without reason, just for the calm of the motion. Each wave on the shore smoothed over his drawings again, erasing them with care. Larry chuckled quietly. Guess the ocean likes to keep things simple. Somewhere behind him, a soft thud echoed a coconut dropping from a palm tree near the gym. It rolled a few feet, bumping against a rock. Larry turned his head, smiling. "Even the island's calling it a day," he said softly. He leaned back again, resting on his elbows, eyes drifting toward the stars now slowly appearing above. They looked sharper in the deepening blue, tiny white sparks scattered across the water's mirror. He found the same constellation he always did, one that looked like a dumbbell, faint and crooked, but somehow fitting. That's me, he thought, smiling. Even up there, still lifting. But then his gaze moved to another cluster of stars, softer, gentler, a wide curve that looked like a wave curling mid-motion. He watched it for a long while, feeling the slow pull of its shape. Maybe that was him too strong, but always flowing. The world had gone quiet, except for the whisper of the water and the faint buzz of glowing insects drifting by. The tiki torches from the huts flickered softly, their flames swaying like they were nodding off. Larry picked up a small pebble beside him and tossed it gently into the waves. It landed with a soft plop, sending out a ripple that shimmered under the moonlight. He followed the ripple's journey with his eyes until it vanished into the dark. Everything did, eventually. And that was okay. He leaned his head back, eyes half closed now. His body felt light, like the ocean itself had lifted the weight from his shoulders. Every muscle was calm, every breath steady. The moon climbed higher, silver light washing across the sand. The gym in the background was almost hidden now, its windows glowing dimly like sleepy eyes. The tide crept closer again, kissing the base of the building gently as if saying goodnight. Larry smiled, barely opening his eyes. "You too, old friend," he whispered to the waves. A cool gust of wind moved across the beach, brushing through the palm leaves and sending a soft hiss through the air. It carried the sound of the ocean deeper into the night, slow, steady, and endlessly peaceful. Larry's claws twitched slightly as he stretched out, lying flat on the sand now, arms at his sides, legs crossed comfortably. The stars above him swayed with the rhythm of the waves below. The night had claimed the beach fully, and in the dark, only two colors remained: the deep blue of the sea and the soft silver of the moonlight. Oh, Larry took one last slow breath in. The salt filled his lungs, cool and sweet. He exhaled, feeling everything else leave him, the tension, the noise, the rush of the day. There was nothing left to lift, nothing to chase, only calm. And as the tide inched closer, brushing the edge of his claws, Larry's eyes drifted shut, not to sleep yet, but to listen. To the ocean, to the night, to himself. The tide had crept close enough now that the waves whispered just beside Larry's elbows. Their edges curled over the sand, pulling back with a soft hush that matched the rhythm of his breathing. The world around him had become a painting silver moon above, quiet water below, and the scent of salt and stillness filling everything in between. For a while he didn't move. The cool grains of sand beneath him shifted slowly, as if adjusting to hold him more comfortably. He could almost feel the pulse of the sea beneath the surface, steady, endless. But eventually, he sat up, brushing sand from his chest and shoulders. The gym stood behind him, bathed in gentle light from the moon and torches. The reflection shimmered across the glass doors like soft ripples of energy. Larry looked at it the same way one might look at a dear old friend. He rose slowly, stretching not like a warm-up, but like someone waking from a deep, peaceful rest. His joints cracked softly, his arms flexing against the breeze. But the movement wasn't for show. It was grounding, natural. As he turned toward the gym, the sound of the waves followed him, blending with the faint echo of tiki drums far in the distance. The night had deepened, stars crowding above, faint constellations glowing in a clear navy sky. Larry stepped inside the gym one last time. The lights were dim now, the air warm from the day's effort. Rows of dumbbells, benches, and treadmills stood still, silent shadows of movement. A towel hung over the nearest bar, a small reminder of the day that had passed. He picked it up and folded it neatly, setting it aside on the counter. His reflection in the gym's mirror looked calm, not the usual grin or flex, but something quieter. His eyes lingered on himself for a moment before drifting upward to the words painted above the mirror. Keep pushing. Larry smiled faintly. Guess even that means something different now, he murmured. He walked to the main switch near the door and flipped it down. The lights dimmed further, leaving only a faint blue hue spilling through the windows from the moon outside. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of life. The hum of the sea, the faint tap of water droplets from the ceiling, the soft hiss of air through the vents. Larry took one last look at the space. Good work today, buddy, he whispered, patting the wall near the door as if the gym could hear him. Then he stepped outside, locking the door gently behind him. The sand was cool under his feet now. The ocean shimmered with streaks of light, not just from the moon, but from tiny glowing creatures beneath the surface, their movements soft and fluid. He walked slowly, following the curve of the shoreline. Each step left a clear footprint, only to be washed away seconds later. The rhythm made him smile the way the sea erased everything without a trace, leaving the sand ready for new steps. In the distance, a group of jellyfish floated lazily near the water's edge, their bodies glowing faint pink and blue. The sight stopped Larry in his tracks. He crouched slightly, watching them pulse with slow grace. "Even you guys are cooling down, huh?" he whispered, his tone filled with quiet wonder. The breeze shifted again, brushing past his shoulders, carrying the scent of seaweed and salt. His eyes softened as he looked out at the horizon, the moon now high, the stars surrounding it like sparks of calm energy. He thought about tomorrow, another sunrise, another workout, another chance to teach the younger fish how to stay strong. But tonight wasn't about that. Tonight was for stillness, for balance. Larry took a deep breath, the cool air filling his chest. His reflection wavered on the water's surface, rippling, soft, alive. He reached out one claw, touching the reflection gently, watching the ripples spread. For a moment, the image of the strong, fearless lifeguard blurred into nothing but circles of light and movement. And that was beautiful. He looked up again. The stars seemed closer now, like they were drifting lower just to watch him walk. He continued along the beach, humming quietly to himself. The tune had no words, no rhythm, just the kind of soft, instinctive sound one makes when the world feels perfectly right. As he neared the edge of the lagoon, the torches from the tiki huts flickered one by one, dimming with the wind. The island was falling asleep, and Larry followed its rhythm naturally. When he finally stopped, he stood at the edge of a small rock ledge overlooking the calm sea. The reflection of the moon spread wide across the water, like a silver path reaching toward the horizon. Larry smiled. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. Then softer. "But for now." He sat down on the rock, claws resting on his knees, eyes closing. The waves brushed against the stones below, their whispers soft and slow. For a long moment, the only sound was the ocean breathing. And in that sound, Larry found everything: strength, rest, peace. The camera slowly pulled back, showing him small beneath the endless night sky. The gym behind him now, just a faint glow in the distance. The sea glittering endlessly, alive and calm. Larry, the strongest lobster in Bikini Bottom, sat still, perfectly still, as the tide moved around him. The moon shimmered overhead. The waves sang softly below, and the night closed like a warm shell around them both. The sand beneath Larry's feet felt cool and forgiving, a quiet contrast to the weight of the dumbbells and hard gym floors. The world outside the gym had softened into hues of indigo and coral, the last shimmer of sunset dissolving into the velvet calm of early night. He walked slowly down the gentle slope toward the shore, towel still hanging over his shoulder, each step leaving shallow impressions that the tide hurried to erase. The faint rhythm of the waves became his metronome: inhale with the pull, exhale with the crash. Larry's body still hummed with the energy of his workout, but the ocean's cool air worked like a balm, easing each muscle, loosening his chest. He rolled his shoulders, stretching one arm across the other, and the motion drew a small ripple of light across his polished shell as moonlight began to bloom over the horizon. Above him, stars flickered awake. Below him, the lagoon mirrored them. Tiny sparks of white and gold reflected in the calm ripples that stretched endlessly into the dark. He paused at the edge of the water, where the foam curled around his claws before slipping away again. The sound was soft and cyclical, the ocean breathing its timeless rhythm. For a moment, Larry simply watched the way the waves folded over one another, the way the moon's reflection broke and mended again with every pulse. "Guess you don't need a cool-down routine when you've got this," he whispered, smiling to himself. He let his towel slip from his shoulder and land in the sand. Then he sat down, legs crossed, claws resting lightly on his knees. The beach stretched quiet on either side, the gym lights behind him, now just faint golden specks far away. From somewhere in the distance came the slow creak of a dock swaying with the tide. A soft bell chimed where a buoy rocked in the current. It all blended together, a melody of the ocean's patience, a lullaby written in water. Larry closed his eyes. He wasn't thinking about sets or times or records now. He was just listening. The whisper of the current, the crackle of sand shifting under its weight, the faint clicking of crabs digging somewhere nearby. He exhaled slowly, the breath fogging briefly in the cool air before fading. His heart slowed, his muscles softened. He remembered how he used to stay at the gym until the lights cut out, pushing himself harder and harder, chasing something invisible. But out here, under the moon, that urgency melted away. There was no timer, no competition, only rhythm, only calm. A jellyfish drifted close, its glow pale and pulsing. It floated just near the water's surface, moving as if it breathed along with the tide. Larry watched it for a while, mesmerized by how effortlessly it moved, not forcing itself forward, just surrendering to the water's flow. He let out a quiet laugh. "Guess that's your secret, huh?" The breeze shifted, carrying the faint scent of salt and seaweed. Larry leaned back, propping himself on his elbows, and stared up at the sky. The stars seemed endless scattered diamonds suspended in a pool of midnight. His reflection shimmered faintly on the wet sand below him, small, golden, and still. He didn't look like the muscle-bound hero of Bikini Bottom here. He just looked like someone finding peace. The longer he sat, the more the sound of the ocean filled him. Every wave seemed to carry something away, the tension from his chest, the leftover adrenaline, the echo of the crowd that used to cheer at competitions. Bit by bit, the noise of the world dissolved into the hush of water and night. Somewhere behind him, the tiki torches outside the gym flickered once and went out completely. It was just him and the moon now, and that was enough. Larry reached down, scooped a handful of sand, and let it trickle slowly through his claws. It sparkled faintly under the starlight as it fell, catching glints of blue and gold. He smiled softly this time, the kind of smile that isn't for anyone to see, only for yourself. The ocean rolled forward again, now brushing his feet. It whispered to stay, and for once Larry listened. The moon hung higher now, a glowing silver coin suspended in a quiet sky. Its light draped itself over the lagoon like silk, spilling into the shallows where the sand gleamed pale blue. Larry rose slowly from where he sat, brushing grains from his shell, the faint grit catching between his claws before falling away. The tide's whisper followed him as he began to walk slow, measured steps that left deep impressions in the damp shore. Each footprint shone for a heartbeat before being erased by the gentle roll of waves. The act felt strangely symbolic, like a ritual of letting go. He wasn't thinking about tomorrow's workout plan or who'd show up at the beach in the morning. He wasn't even thinking about himself as Larry the lifeguard or Bikini Bottom's strongest. Out here, he was just Larry, a small part of the ocean's rhythm, walking through liquid moonlight. Every few steps, he paused to look around. The beach was mostly empty, just the soft silhouettes of coral trees swaying with the current, and the faint hum of life beneath the sand. Bioluminescent plankton dotted the shoreline, glowing faintly under his feet like tiny blue stars. He crouched down, resting one claw against the wet sand, watching how the light pooled around it. "You little guys never quit shining, do you?" he murmured. The glow pulsed once like a heartbeat, as if answering him. Larry smiled, slow, genuine. He stood again, rolling his shoulders as he looked out toward the open water. The lagoon stretched endlessly, waves overlapping in soft rhythm. Somewhere out there, maybe miles away, he could see the faint outline of jellyfish fields, a blurry lavender shimmer at the horizon. It made the world feel wide but kind, peaceful in its distance. He kept walking, letting the water reach higher with each tide. It lapped at his knees now, cool and comforting. The soft hiss of foam brushing against his shell made a sound almost like whispering. If he closed his eyes, it was easy to imagine the sea speaking not in words, but in feeling. He slowed again, looking down at his reflection in the still water between the waves. The ripples bent and reshaped it, distorting his familiar form, the wide shoulders, the confident grin into something softer, more human almost. He tilted his head. "You ever get tired of looking strong all the time?" he asked the water. The reflection shimmered and scattered with a small splash, answering in silence. Larry chuckled quietly. The sound barely carried beyond his own ears. "Yeah, me too." The beach curved gently ahead, leading toward a cluster of small tide pools. He stepped carefully between them, his claws brushing over smooth rocks and shells. The pools reflected the sky, perfectly miniature oceans, each holding its own slice of stars. He knelt down at one of them and peered inside. Tiny creatures moved within, sea snails sliding slowly across pebbles, a small crab tucking itself under a bit of coral, a lone fish darting lazily through strands of seaweed. All of it quiet, all of it alive. He rested his chin on his claw, watching the small world before him. "You guys got it figured out," he said softly. "No rush, no show, just being." A soft wave washed past, filling the tide pool slightly, then pulling back, never taking too much, never giving too much. Balance. Larry took a deep breath, feeling that same rhythm settle inside him. For once, his thoughts weren't racing toward goals or challenges. They just existed, floating like driftwood in calm water. The longer he walked, the more he began to notice small details. The way the moonlight refracted through bubbles, the quiet hum of current around the rocks, the deep, resonant echo of his own heartbeat when he stood still. Each sound folded into the next until there was no difference between ocean and breath, between tide and thought. Everything this was a single, living rhythm. Somewhere nearby, a small group of fish swam in lazy circles under the moonlight. Their scales caught the glow like moving glass, flashing with blues, purples, and faint gold. Larry stopped to watch them for a moment, his eyes softening. They didn't move in sync, but they didn't need to. Each fish followed its own current, yet together they made something harmonious, something complete. He whispered to the water, "Maybe that's what strength really is." The wind shifted again, brushing past his shell, carrying the scent of salt and distant kelp. The air was cool but gentle. Larry closed his eyes, letting the breeze move through him. He took one last step forward until the water reached his waist. Then he stood still, claws open at his sides, eyes half closed. The ocean moved in and out, soft against his shell, patient and endless. It didn't demand anything from him. It didn't test him. It simply held him. For the first time in a long while, Larry didn't feel like he had to hold the world up. He could just float. The waves rose slightly, wrapping around him like cool silk. His reflection shimmered, then vanished entirely as he sank to sit once more in the water. The stars twinkled above. The world exhaled, and Larry Bikini Bottom, strongest, finally let go. The ocean stretched endlessly before him, silver blue and infinite. Larry sat with the water up to his chest now, the tide rising and falling with a rhythm that felt almost like breathing his and the ocean's, perfectly in sync. Every few seconds, a small wave rippled against his shell, warm at first, then cool as it ebbed away. His reflection shimmered faintly in the moonlight, the smooth curve of his claws, the deep red hue of his body, all softened by the silver glow. For a while, he simply watched himself distort and reform with every ripple. It was strangely humbling. The water never held his shape for long. It accepted him, reshaped him, then let him go. He leaned back on his hands, eyes drifting up toward the horizon, where the stars touched the sea. The constellations hung lazily in the sky, faint shapes of anchors, coral reefs, and fishtails tracing invisible stories. One of them, he thought, looked almost like a barbell. That made him chuckle quietly. "Guess I can't escape the gym even out here," he murmured to himself. The sound of his voice faded quickly into the vastness, absorbed by the ocean's patience. He liked that. He liked how small it made him feel. Larry closed his eyes, letting the past roll through him like the tide. He remembered being younger when every morning started with energy, noise, and competition. He remembered the thrill of winning races, the way the sand felt beneath his feet as the crowd cheered his name. "Larry! Larry!" He could still hear it faintly, like echoes of bubbles breaking underwater. Those were good days, filled with movement, laughter, and pride. But now, sitting here under the moon, he realized how different that kind of strength had been. It was loud, fast, eager to prove itself. Though this quiet, was something deeper. He let his fingers sink into the wet sand below, feeling the cold grains slide between them. They moved like time, constant, unstoppable, flowing toward the sea. "You don't hold on," he said softly. "You just move with it." A distant wave broke harder than the rest, sending a fine mist into the air that glimmered like powdered starlight. Larry blinked slowly, watching as it drifted down around him. The droplets caught on his arms and shoulders, tiny points of cool light. He thought of all the mornings he'd told his students at the beach. Strength isn't about showing off, it's about control. He smiled faintly. Guess it's also about knowing when to stop. The water rose again, brushing against his chin. He didn't move. He let it happen. Every wave carried away a little more of the noise that had once filled his head, the tension of pushing limits, the need to always be better. It didn't vanish instantly. It faded gradually, like tide marks slowly dissolving. From somewhere deeper in the lagoon, the faint sound of whale song reached him low, echoing and impossibly distant. It was one of those sounds that made you feel both small and safe at the same time. Larry closed his eyes again, letting it hum through him. He remembered the younger lifeguards who looked up to him wide-eyed, full of energy, eager to prove themselves. He used to laugh at their enthusiasm, but now he understood it was the same spark he once carried. It burned hot and fast. But flames, no matter how bright, eventually calm into embers. He touched his chest lightly. His heartbeat was steady, slow. The ocean answered with its own pulse, deep and timeless. "Maybe that's the trick," he said under his breath. "You stop fighting the current, and you start listening to it." A faint light shimmered under the water of bioluminescent plankton, swirling around his claws, dancing in lazy spirals. He lifted one hand slowly, watching the glow trail from his fingertips like paint across glass. For a brief magical moment, it looked like he was holding a galaxy in his palm. Tiny sparks swirled, fading and glowing again as he moved. He couldn't help but grin, the expression soft and boyish. "Guess I don't need trophies anymore," he said. "I've got stars of my own." He lay back gently into the water, floating now, staring up at the night sky. The surface carried him effortlessly, as if the sea itself had decided to hold him for a while. The waves lapped softly at his sides, rising and falling, rising and falling. He felt weightless, thoughtless, peaceful. The stars above seemed to move closer, reflecting perfectly in the water until it was impossible to tell where sky ended and sea began. The world was one, a calm mirror of light and sound. Larry's eyelids fluttered halfway shut. The hum of the sea deepened, the world dimming into quiet blue tones. In this moment, nothing existed but rhythm, not strength, not weakness, not effort, only flow. He whispered softly, barely audible over the waves, "This is it. This is what peace feels like." A shooting star crossed the sky, a thin streak of silver burning out before it reached the horizon. Larry followed it with his eyes until it disappeared. He took a deep breath, feeling it fill him completely, and when he exhaled, the water seemed to sigh with him. Everything slowed again. The ocean, the stars, even time. The ocean's embrace loosened as the tide began to pull back, the current whispering against Larry's sides before retreating like a tired sigh. He opened his eyes slowly. The sky above him was deeper now, indigo, bleeding into midnight, with stars like scattered pearls across a dark velvet expanse. He floated for a few more seconds, his claws spread lazily, the tips catching streaks of reflected moonlight. Each glint felt like a heartbeat, steady and calm. Then, with a deep exhale, he let his legs drift downward until his feet brushed the sand again. The grains were cool and familiar beneath him. Larry straightened slowly, and the water falling from his shell in soft sheets, glimmering silver as it slid away. The world felt quieter somehow, but not empty. Every sound had softened into rhythm, the slow lap of waves, the distant hum of the reef, the occasional crackle of tiny bubbles bursting on the surface. As he began to wade back toward the shore, his movements were unhurried, deliberate. Each step left small ripples in his wake. The water clung to his shell for a moment before letting go, droplets shining on his skin like scattered stars. He looked around as he moved the coastline, now glowing faintly blue where the plankton shimmered in the shallows. It looked like the stars had spilled into the water, a world both above and below, perfectly mirrored. Larry reached the edge of the lagoon and sat down once more, this time where the water met the sand. His towel still rested nearby, half buried where the waves had touched it. He picked it up, shook it gently, and laid it across his lap. The moon had risen high overhead, a silver guardian watching the sleeping ocean. The gym in the distance was dark now, its outline softened by the sea's haze. The torches along the beach had gone out completely, their smoke trails faint and ghost-like in the cool water's sway. Larry didn't mind the darkness. In fact, it felt right. The night had wrapped itself around everything, not as a blanket to hide the world, but as something that allowed it to rest. He gazed down at the water lapping at his feet. For the first time in ages, he didn't feel the need to chase anything. No new record, no goal, no title, just this, the steady living breath of the sea. He could feel his heartbeat again, slow and sure. It wasn't pounding anymore. It was peaceful, steady, like a drum keeping time with the ocean. He picked up a small seashell that had washed near his claw. It was smooth, spiraled perfectly. Its colors faint in the moonlight, pale pink and ivory. Larry turned it over gently, studying it like a secret. "You've seen it all, huh?" he whispered to it. "Storms, tides, sun, and still you stay." He placed the shell back in the sand, nestling it gently where the water could reach it again. A faint gust of wind brushed past, stirring the surface of the lagoon. The waves stretched a little farther now, kissing the tips of his feet before curling back. The foam that followed shimmered faintly as if the sea itself was smiling. Larry leaned back, bracing himself on his claws, staring up once more. His breath slowed with every passing moment. He could feel the last bits of tension leave him, the faint ache in his shoulders, the tired heaviness in his chest. Everything loosened until he felt light again. The stars above began to blur slightly as a thin veil of cloud drifted across them, soft and ghostly. The moonlight diffused, painting the scene in gentle shades of gray-blue. For a long while, nothing moved except the water. Larry listened. There it was again, that subtle harmony between himself and the sea. A dialogue without words. The ocean breathed in and he breathed out. The waves rose and his chest followed. A rhythm. Simple. Perfect. He closed his eyes and smiled faintly. "You're stronger than all of us, huh?" he whispered to the ocean. "But gentle, that's the real trick." The tide answered only with another soft wave, brushing the sand around his feet like a kind hand. The stillness didn't feel lonely now. It felt like company. Like something vast but kind had chosen to sit beside him for a while. Larry's thoughts drifted not far, just lightly, like sea foam carried by wind. He thought about the students he'd see tomorrow, the laughter that would return to the beach when the morning came. He thought about the sun rising over the lagoon, the first golden spark of day touching the same water that now glowed with moonlight. And he knew this peace wasn't the opposite of strength. It was the part that made strength mean something. He whispered softly, "Balance, huh? Maybe that's what I was missing." The ocean, as if in answer, rolled forward once more, touching his claws before pulling away. Larry looked out toward the horizon where sky and sea blended into a single, endless dark. The stars trembled faintly, their reflections dancing on the waves. He smiled again, slow, content, quiet. "All right," he said under his breath. "See you tomorrow, Big Blue." He stood, draped the towel over his shoulders again, and took one last look at the ocean before turning back toward the beach path. Behind him, the water shimmered once more, faint ripples glowing like breath, as if the sea was waving goodnight. Larry walked slowly, every step sinking softly into the sand, until the light from the moon caught his outline and turned it silver. The camera lingered on the empty shore footprints fading, water glowing, night alive with silence. The tide whispered once more. Then the screen faded gently to black. The horizon was still wrapped in deep blue when Larry stirred awake. The sound of waves was softer than before, more of a rhythm than a roar, and each crest carried the faint glimmer of dawn. The first light hadn't yet broken through, but the promise of it hung in the air like the hush before a song begins. Larry opened his eyes slowly, the cool morning air brushing across his shell. He had fallen asleep, sitting up against the smooth rock, towel still draped around his shoulders. For a brief second, he didn't move. He simply listened to the water breathing, the wind curling around the dunes, the faint hiss of bubbles from the distant reef. A soft ache lived in his muscles, not pain, but the kind that reminded him he had worked hard, lived deeply. He flexed one arm lazily, feeling the smooth pull of tendons. "Huh," he whispered to himself, voice rasped but content. "Guess I'm not as invincible as I act." A gull cried faintly overhead, wings cutting through the dim sky. The sound echoed, then faded into the vast openness of the sea. Larry's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the faintest orange line had started to bleed into the night. The stars were still visible, but they flickered now, dimming as the morning claimed its turn. He watched the transition with quiet fascination. Every sunrise felt the same, yet everyone reminded him that something always returns light, warmth, energy, even when the night stretches long and the sun never forgets its way back. He exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders before standing. Sand clung to his legs as he brushed it away, the grains sparkling faintly in the dawn glow. The sea stretched endlessly before him, calm, wide, alive. He could feel its heartbeat beneath his feet, even through the ground. He walked toward the shallows, letting the waves reach for him again. They lapped gently at his claws as if greeting him. The water was cold but not sharp. It awakened him, tracing fresh life across his skin. Larry crouched down, cupping the ocean in his hands. The surface reflected a pale orange streak now, like the first whisper of sunlight had kissed it. He splashed a little water over his face, shaking his head slightly. Droplets flew in every direction, glittering in the faint glow. For a while, he didn't say anything. The silence around him didn't ask for words. He finally spoke softly, as if to the sea itself. "Strong doesn't just mean lifting, huh? It's this too." The tide answered him with a soft push forward, curling around his feet again. He smiled faintly, lowering himself to sit cross-legged on the damp sand. His reflection rippled on the surface of the water, not perfect, not still, but maybe that was the point. It wavered, shifted, changed shape with every motion of the sea, just like him. He watched it for a long moment. In the reflection, he saw more than his broad chest or massive claws. He saw his breath steadying, his eyes calmer. The part of him that had always needed to win, to dominate, had grown quiet overnight. A few crabs scuttled past him, tiny claws raised like shields. He chuckled lightly, watching them dig quick holes near the tide line. "Smart little guys," he murmured. "Hide when it's rough, come out when it's calm. You get it." The wind picked up slightly, sweeping through the beach grass, carrying the smell of salt and sunlight. The sky had fully started to change now, orange deepening to rose, blue fading upward. The light touched the water, turning every ripple into a moving gem. Larry reached down again, this time tracing circles in the sand beside him. His claw drew lazy spirals, the design instantly erased by the next wave. He didn't mind. There was something peaceful about making something that wasn't meant to last. He leaned back on his arms, the warmth of the new sun finally brushing his shell. It wasn't hot yet, just gentle, comforting. like a hand on his back. The gym in the distance was visible again. Its doors were still closed, its roof catching early light. Larry stared at it quietly, remembering the countless mornings he'd sprinted there before the sun, yelling, "No pain, no gain," at the top of his lungs. But today, the words didn't come. He didn't need them. Today wasn't about pushing harder. It was about being still enough to feel the weight of what he'd already carried and realizing he didn't have to carry it all the time. He watched the sunlight slowly crawl across the gym walls like the day itself was waking up inside it. Larry smiled again, a deep, calm smile that touched his eyes this time. Maybe this was what real strength looked like, not the power to move mountains, but the peace to sit beside them and watch them glow. He took one more deep breath, the air clean and alive. The waves rolled in once more, almost in rhythm with his lungs. The sea was calm. He was calm. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. Larry began walking again, slow, unhurried steps along the edge of the water. The sand was cool beneath his feet, the foam brushing lightly against his claws as the tide breathed in and out. The sunlight was still soft, stretched low across the horizon, painting everything in mellow gold. He didn't walk toward any goal. For once, there was nowhere to be, no record to break, no crowd to impress, just the sound of the surf and the whisper of the wind through seagrass. Each step left a faint imprint behind him, quickly erased by the gentle waves, a reminder that even strong footsteps fade like everything else. His thoughts drifted back to the gym. The echo of laughter, clanging weights, shouts of "Let's go, Larry," still floated faintly in his head. He'd been proud of that world, of the admiration, of the cheers when he lifted entire barbells above his head. He'd always been the picture of confidence, the hero of Goo Lagoon. But standing here with the morning still quiet and kind, that image felt almost like someone else's reflection. He remembered one afternoon when SpongeBob had wandered into the gym, eyes wide, holding tiny foam dumbbells. "I want to be strong like you, Larry," SpongeBob had said. Larry had laughed, good-natured, encouraging, but now he wondered what SpongeBob had really seen in him. Was it strength, or just the surface of it? He crouched down and picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his claw. The surface was perfect, polished by time and tide. It looked effortless, yet it had taken years of being tossed around by the sea to reach this state. He smiled faintly. "Guess that's how it works for us too," he murmured. The wind carried the scent of salt and kelp as he tossed the stone gently into the water. It skipped twice before disappearing beneath a small ripple. Larry watched the circles expand, fade, and vanish. Everything passed, even ripples made by something as strong as he was. He exhaled, stretching his arms above his head. Maybe being strong isn't about how long something lasts, he thought aloud. Maybe it's about how gently you can let it go. He sat down again on the sand, digging his claws lightly into it, feeling the cool grains between each finger. Above him, the sky had fully awakened, soft streaks of pink, giving way to pale morning blue. A few clouds drifted lazily, their undersides glowing with light. Somewhere behind him, a distant splash broke the calm. He turned to see a few young fish lifting weights made of coral at the far edge of the beach. They looked so full of energy, laughing as they competed. He smiled the same way an older swimmer might watch kids jump into the shallow end, knowing how much they still had to learn. There was a time when he'd have joined them, showing off, flexing, making the moment louder. Now he was content just to watch. He leaned back on his elbows, listening to the sea. The rhythm of the waves matched the slow, steady beat of his heart. You used to think stillness meant weakness, he whispered to himself. Now look at you. He chuckled softly. The sound of his laughter mixed with the ocean breeze, small, sincere, and free of ego. He remembered all the posters around town with his face on them. Train like Larry, bright, bold letters plastered across gym walls and billboards. He wondered how many people thought that version of him was all there was. The powerful pose, the grin, the muscles. But sitting here, under the sun and the soft hum of the tide, he felt lighter than he ever did in those photos. The ocean stretched endlessly ahead of him, a horizon that no strength could conquer. No matter how strong he was, he couldn't lift the sea, couldn't control it, couldn't outlast it. And somehow that truth didn't scare him anymore. It felt like freedom. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The world hummed quietly, as if the entire ocean had slowed down just to match his pace. A gentle voice seemed to whisper through the waves, not words, but something like a feeling. You don't have to prove your strength to be strong. He smiled, not opening his eyes. Yeah, he murmured. Guess I finally get that. A soft current rolled in, brushing over his feet like a handshake, then faded away again. The morning had fully arrived now. The light was brighter, but still calm, golden on the water, soft on his shell. Larry sat there just breathing for a long time. Not thinking, not remembering, just being. The sea, the sand, the air, they all seemed to breathe with him. And for once, Larry didn't feel like a lifeguard, or a hero, or a bodybuilder. He just felt like a small part of something vast, something that didn't need strength, because it already was strength. He tilted his head back toward the sky, letting the sunlight warm his face. The corners of his mouth curled up in quiet peace. Yeah, he said softly. This feels right. The sun had climbed higher now, shimmering like molten gold across the surface of Goo Lagoon. The air was warmer, but still soft, the kind of warmth that hugged rather than burned. Larry walked along the waterline, his reflection stretching beside him, rippling with every small wave that reached his feet. The tide had shifted slightly. Tiny shells rolled in with the current, leaving faint trails in the sand. He bent down occasionally, picking one up to examine its spiral design before gently setting it back in the surf. Everything in nature had a rhythm. Even the smallest things seemed to move with purpose. Funny, he murmured, watching a shell spin away. How everything's got its place, even when it's moving. A slow voice answered from behind him. Ah, but that's because the sea remembers where everything belongs. Larry turned. An old sea turtle was resting on a flat rock nearby, half submerged in the water. His shell was faded and cracked, like driftwood polished by time. He had a long, patient face, the kind that didn't rush to smile, but smiled deeply when it did. Larry walked closer, careful not to cast too large a shadow. Didn't see you there, old-timer, he said with a polite grin. Didn't mean to disturb your peace. The turtle chuckled, a sound that seemed to echo from far below the surface. You didn't? Peace isn't something that gets disturbed easily. It's just something most folks forget how to listen to. Larry nodded, sitting down in the sand near him. Guess I've been learning that lately. The turtle looked at him for a moment, eyes narrowing kindly. Larry the Lobster, right? Goo Lagoon's strongest? Larry rubbed the back of his neck almost shyly. That's what they say. The turtle hummed, eyes drifting toward the horizon. Strongest at lifting things, maybe. But strength takes many shapes. Larry followed his gaze, watching the sun sparkle across the waves. You sound like someone who's seen a lot. Seen, yes, the turtle said softly. But more importantly, waited. time teaches strength better than any gym. It's not about how much weight you carry, but how long you can stand still without sinking. Larry thought about that. He'd always been the kind of guy who moved constantly. Reps, laps, rescues, training. Stillness had always felt like weakness. But lately, he'd started to realize how loud stillness could be, how full it was of life. The turtle's voice was slow, patient, every word like a wave. The tide doesn't fight the moon. It just moves when it's called. Comes, goes, rests, returns. That's strength, too. Larry stared down at the water washing over his claws. Each retreating wave left a glittering trace of foam before being swallowed by the next. So, you're saying strength isn't control, it's trust. The turtle's eyes gleamed. Exactly. The sea doesn't resist the pull. It flows with it. You lift weights, yes, but can you lift silence? Can you hold calm without trying to break it? Larry laughed softly, shaking his head. Guess I've been skipping that workout. The turtle smiled a little. Then maybe it's time to train in patience. The waves never rush, and yet they shape the entire shore. Larry looked at the water again, really looking this time not as something to swim through or fight against, but as something alive, breathing, patient. The turtle's words sank into him like stones into deep water. He realized that all the competitions, all the posing, all the noise it had made him strong on the outside, sure. But on the inside, he'd always been trying to catch something that didn't need chasing. Do you ever miss it? Larry asked after a pause. The energy? The rush? The turtle chuckled again. Sometimes. But I found something better. The quiet moments are like the low tide. They show you what's really been hiding under the waves. Larry watched the horizon, his heart steady, his mind quiet. Maybe it's time I start looking under the waves, too. Then start by standing still, the turtle said gently. Let the world come to you for once. Larry nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I can do that. The turtle began to drift back into deeper water, the sunlight catching his shell as he moved. Remember, he said, voice fading with the tide, real strength doesn't shout. It listens. Larry watched until the turtle was gone, just ripples, then calm again. He stayed there, sitting in the soft foam, breathing with the sea. The sound of waves was different now, not just background noise, but a voice he finally understood. He smiled faintly, whispering, "Thanks, old friend." The ocean answered with a gentle wave over his feet. The sun dipped low again, mellow gold fading to coral, then into the first strokes of evening violet. The ocean mirrored the change, turning from glittering blue to soft gray silver. The air cooled gently, and the sounds of Goo Lagoon began to slow the chatter of beachgoers thinning, the rhythm of the waves deepening. Larry stood where the old turtle had vanished, his claws resting loosely at his sides. For a while he simply watched the water darken, the light slipping further away with each wave. Yet unlike before, he didn't feel any urge to chase the fading day. He felt calm, grounded. The turtle's words still echoed in his mind. Real strength doesn't shout, it listens. He breathed in, long and deep, letting the salt air fill him like a quiet promise. When the first star blinked awake above the horizon, Larry turned and began walking home. His steps left shallow prints in the sand, and this time, when the waves erased them, he smiled. Not everything needed to stay to be meaningful. His hut wasn't far, a modest wooden cabin tucked near the palms. It wasn't fancy, but it carried his life within its walls. Surfboards leaning in one corner, a shelf of gym trophies polished to a shine, and next to them a framed photo of SpongeBob and Patrick cheering him on at last year's Goo Lagoon games. He paused at the door, hand resting on the handle, staring at that photo through the window. The memory made him grin. SpongeBob's eyes had been wide with admiration, Patrick's with confusion, and Larry's own smile so wide, so sure, almost seemed to belong to another version of himself. He stepped inside. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath him. A faint scent of coconut oil and sea salt filled the room, familiar and warm. The lamps glowed a gentle amber, their light pulsing slightly with the current outside. Larry set a kettle on the small stove, just water and seaweed leaves tonight. He didn't feel like protein shakes or massive meals. Tonight was about something lighter, something that matched the calm rolling through his chest. While the water warmed, he walked to the window. Outside, the ocean shimmered under moonlight. The waves were steady, patient, the same rhythm that had guided him all day. He leaned on the sill, claws tapping gently against the wood. "Thanks for the lesson," he whispered toward the sea. "Guess I needed that." The kettle gave a soft hiss. He poured the tea into a shell-carved mug and carried it to his chair near the door. As he sat down, the world felt small, contained yet infinite all around him. He took a sip. The taste was earthy and simple. It grounded him even more. His eyes wandered again toward his trophies. Each one gleamed in the warm light symbols of past glory. But tonight, they didn't stir that familiar pride. Instead, they reminded him of how much of his life had been a chase for applause. Now there was a sweeter sound silence. He set the mug down, leaned back, and closed his eyes. The ocean's hum filled the room. The clock ticked softly. Somewhere outside, a jellyfish drifted past the window, glowing faintly like a floating lantern. Larry thought of the old turtle, of the tide, of every moment that had led him here, all the noise, all the stillness, all the change. He whispered, half asleep, "Maybe peace is the heaviest weight, and the easiest one to carry." A smile found its way to his face, the kind of smile that came not from pride, but from gratitude. He finished his tea, set the mug aside, and dimmed the lamp. The moonlight took over, spilling across his shell in a silver wash. He walked to the door, opened it slightly, and let the night air in. The waves glowed faintly under the starlight. Each crest looked alive, whispering in tones the heart could understand better than the ear. Larry stepped outside, feeling the cool sand beneath his feet again. He walked just a few paces toward the water, stopping when the tide brushed gently over his claws. He stood there, breathing, not flexing, not running, not lifting, just breathing. The stars above multiplied a scattered map of light, stretching beyond sight. And beneath them, Larry the Lobster Goo Lagoon's strongest lifeguard stood still, content, and quietly smiling. The tide rolled in once more, curling around him like an embrace before retreating. He whispered to himself, "I'll still train tomorrow, but maybe I'll start with listening." He turned back toward his hut, where the window glowed softly against the blue night. The scene held still ocean, moon, hut, and the soft rise and fall of waves against the shore. A gentle breeze drifted past, carrying the faint sound of laughter from far away, maybe memories, maybe just echoes of the sea. Larry paused, closed his eyes, and let it pass through him like music. The night deepened, slow and quiet. Somewhere in the sky, a shooting star crossed the horizon. Larry smiled one last time, whispering, "Good night, Goo Lagoon." Then he stepped inside, the door closing softly behind him. Outside, the sea shimmered. The tide whispered. The world breathed. And the calm waves carried the weight of one peaceful heart into the gentle dark. The world was quiet now. Even the ocean had softened into a slow, rhythmic whisper. Only the distant shimmer of jellyfish gliding through the water gave movement to the night. Inside his little beach hut, Larry lit a small lantern near the counter. The glow was warm and golden, casting ripples of light across the wooden walls. Shadows of shells and surfboards danced gently with the movement of the waves outside. The space felt safe, smaller than the vast world beyond the door, but full of peace. He glanced at the clock. It was late, but he wasn't sleepy yet. His body felt light, and his thoughts, usually buzzing with plans for tomorrow's training, were calm, drifting like the tide. He walked to the small shelf near his stove, scanning the jars lined neatly in a row. Kelp powder, coral milk, sea banana slices, he murmured, smiling. Yeah, this'll do. He began to prepare his nightly smoothie, a simple ritual, something he'd done for years after long days. But tonight there was no rush, no muscle memory driving his movements. Every motion felt slow, deliberate, almost graceful. He scooped the kelp powder into the blender. The soft thud of the spoon echoed faintly in the quiet room. Next came a swirl of sea banana slices, pale green and glowing faintly under the lamp. He poured in the coral milk, its surface glinting like liquid moonlight. As the ingredients mixed, he paused to listen to the soft hum of the ocean beyond the walls. The sound folded into the room, mingling with the faint rhythm of the blender. Together they created a gentle symphony, one mechanical, one natural, both steady and serene. When the smoothie was done, he poured it into a wide glass shell cup. Steam curled from its surface in delicate spirals, disappearing into the cool night air. He carried it to the table by the window and sat down, the wooden chair creaking quietly beneath his weight. Outside, the moon floated like a giant pearl above the sea. Its reflection shimmered across the waves, breaking into pieces with every crest and fold. Larry took a slow sip. The taste was smooth, faintly sweet, and earthy. It reminded him of balance, of effort rewarded, of energy restored. He exhaled softly, setting the glass down. Not bad, old boy, he said to himself with a small grin. Still got the touch. A single candle flickered on the table beside him. Its flame bent slightly with each passing breeze, the shadows shifting gently around the room. On the wall hung framed photos, familiar faces caught in moments of joy. There was one of SpongeBob mid-laugh, another of Sandy lifting a barbell twice her size, and a smaller one of Larry himself smiling, flexing, full of fire. He looked at that one a little longer. I still know that guy, he murmured, but I don't need to be him all the time. He leaned back, eyes tracing the faint glow of the candlelight as it danced across the photos. For the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like company. The refrigerator hummed softly in the corner. The kettle clicked as it cooled. A conch shell wind chime near the door gave a faint clink, moved by the ocean breeze sneaking through the window. Larry smiled, taking another sip of his smoothie. Man, he whispered, I used to think quiet nights were boring. Now they're kind of perfect. He rested his elbows on the table, chin in his claws, watching the moonlight shimmer across the waves. The reflection seemed to breathe with him, in, out, calm, steady. Somewhere far off, a whale sang low, distant, beautiful. The sound traveled through the sea like a heartbeat, soft and full of age-old wisdom. Larry closed his eyes and let the melody wash over him. He could feel the vibrations through the floor, through the air, through his chest. It was as if the ocean itself was whispering a lullaby. When he opened his eyes again, the candle's flame had steadied. The room glowed in soft gold and blue, perfectly still. He raised the glass once more in a small, quiet toast. To calm nights, he said softly, and to taking things slow. Then he smiled, took another sip, and listened to the waves answer him back. The last sip of the smoothie slid down smoothly, leaving a faint sweetness on Larry's tongue. He set the glass aside and took a slow breath, feeling the cool ocean air drift through the half-open window. The breeze carried with it the scent of salt, coral, and far-off kelp fields, a fragrance that reminded him of home. For a moment, he just sat there still and listening. The low hum of the sea blended with the rhythmic creak of the wooden beams above him. Somewhere outside, a crab shuffled across the sand. Every sound seemed to speak softly, reminding him that the world hadn't stopped. It had only gone quiet enough for him to hear it. He stood up and stretched, his shadow stretching along the wall behind him. The candle flickered as he moved, making the pictures sway in rippling light. He picked up the empty glass, smiling as he looked through its curved surface, the moonlight refracting into shimmering patterns that played on the table. "Not bad," he said again, his voice low and calm. "Guess I'll sleep good tonight." He carried the glass to the small sink near the counter. The water that ran from the tap was faintly glowing. Filtered bioluminescent plankton that Bikini Bottom plumbing always seemed to catch. It made even the simplest task, washing dishes, look magical. Larry gently rinsed the glass, watching the glow swirl around like tiny stars in the water. The bubbles rose and popped quietly. He scrubbed the shell cup clean, then set it on a towel to dry. The rhythmic clink of dishes and the gentle whoosh of the tap created a steady, peaceful rhythm, a lullaby made from simple motions. When the glass was done, he wiped the counter with a small coral cloth, smoothing it carefully, every motion slow and thoughtful. He was never in a hurry at night anymore. He used to rush through everything, workout, meals, even rest, chasing some invisible goal. But somewhere along the way, he'd learned that slowing down wasn't weakness. It was strength of another kind. He turned off the light above the counter and let the room settle into dimness again. The only glow now came from the small candle on the table and the soft moonlight spilling through the window. The shadows stretched long and soft, merging gently like watercolor strokes. He walked over to the window, leaning his elbows on the sill. The cool breeze touched his face, carrying the faint hum of waves breaking over the reef. Out there, the ocean shimmered under the silver moon, endless, patient, alive. Larry's eyes softened as he watched the tide. For years, he'd defined himself by strength, the loud, visible kind that turned heads and drew applause. But as the water whispered before him, he realized again that there was another kind of strength, the quiet endurance of the sea. The calm of something that didn't need to prove its power anymore. He whispered to himself, "Guess the waves lift more than weights ever could." His reflection on the glass stared back. Calm eyes, faint smile, a face at peace. Behind that reflection, the moon hung full and clear. The combination almost looked surreal, the calm lobster mirrored against the calm world. Larry tapped the window frame lightly, a soft rhythm that echoed like a heartbeat. Each tap matched the distant roll of waves outside, sinking perfectly, as if the sea itself moved with him. After a while, he turned from the window and sat back down at the table. The candle had burned lower, its wax pooling gently at the base. He watched the flame twist, then relax again. Like it, too, was breathing with the rhythm of the tide. He rested his head on one hand, looking at the photo wall again. The image of SpongeBob grinning wildly beside a broken boat made him chuckle. The one of Sandy standing tall beside him after a tough race made his chest swell with warmth. And that old photo, the one where he was posing in the gym, surrounded by fans, made him think about how far he'd come. Not from that moment, but from the mindset that came with it. He didn't crave the crowd anymore. He didn't need the cheers. The quiet had become its own applause, subtle but sincere. The clock ticked softly, its sound steady and comforting. Each second felt like the ocean, breathing in and out, never rushed. Larry leaned back and closed his eyes, just letting himself listen. Tick, whoosh, creak. The song of the night played around him, a rhythm too soft to record, but too perfect to forget. He felt his heartbeat slow to match it, his body relaxing into the calm he'd built for himself. Yeah, he whispered with a sleepy grin. This is what real strength feels like. The candle flickered one last time, the flame stretching high, then shrinking low, before steadying again as if agreeing with him. The night outside called to Larry like a soft voice carried on the wind. He turned toward the door, hesitating for a brief moment before opening it. The hinges creaked quietly, not sharply, but like an old friend groaning awake from rest. A cool current of air brushed across his face, carrying the scent of salt and seagrass. The kind of scent that felt ancient, the same air that had blown across oceans long before he was ever born. He stepped out barefoot onto the sand, and the ground felt smooth and damp, still holding traces of the day's warmth. The water nearby whispered softly, waves curling up and breaking in slow, deliberate motions. The sky above was painted deep indigo, the moon sitting perfectly above the horizon, round, patient, glowing silver. Tiny jellyfish drifted in the distance like floating lanterns. The sea seemed alive in every quiet shimmer. Larry took a slow, deep breath and stretched his arms again, not to build muscle, not to test strength, but simply to feel. To feel the air slide past his shell, the sound of water breathing, the tiny sand grain shifting under his feet. He whispered, "You don't need to lift the world. Sometimes you just let it hold you." The words left his mouth in a small puff of bubbles that floated up lazily, catching the moonlight before vanishing into the night. He began to walk along the shoreline, each step leaving a faint trail that disappeared almost instantly under the soft waves. The moonlight shimmered across his back, tracing smooth silver lines along his shell. The rhythm of his steps synced with the water's pulse step, hush, step, hush, until it became something meditative. The noise of the day was gone, and all that remained was this, the quiet world, the steady tide, and the steady beat of a heart that no longer needed to race. He passed by a few familiar spots, a coral rock shaped like a dumbbell, a beach umbrella folded for the night, and the faint outline of a volleyball net waving gently in the tide. Each thing held a story, games played, laughter shared, summer days burned bright. Larry smiled softly at the memories. "Good times," he murmured. He stopped near a half-buried log that had washed up on shore weeks ago. It made the perfect seat, smoothed by water and salt. He sat down, resting his elbows on his knees and watching the moonlight skip across the surface of the sea. Far off in the distance, Bikini Bottom glowed faintly under the water, a cluster of tiny lights that flickered like fireflies. He could imagine everyone else asleep in their homes, SpongeBob snoring with a smile, Patrick dreaming under his rock, Sandy probably reading in her dome until she drifted off. "Guess everyone's got their own kind of peace," he whispered. He picked up a small pebble and tossed it into the water. It made almost no sound, just a soft plip followed by ripples that expanded outward like silver rings. He watched them fade and then disappear just like worries do if you wait long enough. For a while, he just sat there breathing slowly. The ocean sang its timeless song, a low hum of life moving, resting, and returning. Larry closed his eyes, letting the sound wrap around him. He could feel every detail. The air brushing past his face, The distant hiss of a tide shifting against coral, the faint echo of bubbles popping near the shore. Each sound felt like a heartbeat of the sea. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he had to do anything. He didn't need to perform or impress or even think. He just was. That was enough. He leaned back slightly, resting his head against the smooth driftwood, and watched the clouds drift lazily across the moon. Their shadows brushed over the sand, moving like calm, slow waves. Every now and then, a small fish leapt from the water, catching a glint of moonlight before diving back in a brief spark in a quiet world. Larry chuckled softly. "Show off," he said under his breath, but his tone was affectionate. As he sat there, the tide crept a little closer, lapping gently at his feet. The water was cool now, but it didn't sting. It was soothing, like the ocean itself was tucking him in. He whispered almost sleepily, "All right, ocean. Guess I'll call it a night." The waves replied with a soft hiss, almost like a lullaby. He stood up slowly, brushed sand from his legs, and took one last look at the horizon. The stars seemed closer now, scattered across the surface of the water, blurring the line between sea and sky. Then he turned back toward his hut, moving slowly, peacefully, as though every step was part of a quiet ritual. The kind of calm that didn't end when he went inside it, just deepened. The light from his window glowed softly in the distance, waiting for him like a heartbeat in the dark. Larry stepped back toward his hut, the sand cool beneath his feet now. Each step left a brief imprint that shimmered under the moonlight before the tide erased it, a slow, natural rhythm that felt almost like breathing. The breeze carried the soft hiss of waves curling over themselves, and the air was thick with calm. As he reached the wooden steps leading up to his porch, he paused for a moment, looking back over his shoulder. The beach stretched out behind him, long, silver, endless. The horizon glowed faintly, where ocean and sky met in a blur of deep blue. He smiled quietly. "Good work today." He whispered to no one in particular, maybe to the sea, maybe to himself. The door gave a soft click as he pushed it open. Inside, the candle had burned low, its flame now a small, sleepy glow. The air felt warmer here, the scent of kelp and wax blending gently with the salt outside. He set his towel on a chair, folded neatly, and reached over to switch off the remaining lamp. The room dimmed to a comfortable twilight. Only the moonlight coming through the round window remained, painting silvery patterns across the floorboards. Larry walked over to the window and rested his claws on the sill. The ocean outside shimmered faintly, each wave cresting like a heartbeat. The world was asleep but alive, and he was perfectly in rhythm with it. He could still hear faint laughter echoing somewhere far in his memory, SpongeBob's bright, chaotic voice yelling encouragement at the gym, Patrick's goofy chuckles. Those sounds had once filled his days with motion and noise, but now they felt like warm echoes, a part of him that still smiled somewhere deep inside. He whispered softly, "You guys rest easy, all right?" Then he turned back to the center of the room, where his hammock swayed lazily between two coral posts. The blanket, a soft, faded blue, waited like a calm wave itself. Larry settled into it slowly, the hammock creaking gently under his weight. The motion rocked him lightly side to side, in rhythm with the sound of the sea outside. From his position, he could see through the round window, the moon still high, the stars scattered wide. One of them flickered brightly for a moment, and he followed it with his eyes until it disappeared behind a passing cloud. He took a deep breath. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of salt. It filled his lungs like peace itself. As he exhaled, he felt the weight of the day finally lift, not just the fatigue from the gym, but the quiet, invisible strain that came from always trying to be strong. Tonight, he wasn't Larry the Lobster, lifeguard, fitness hero, Goo Lagoon icon. He was just Larry, a lobster under the sea, resting beneath the same stars that watched over every other creature in Bikini Bottom. He closed his eyes, letting the sound of the waves take over. The slow rush of water against the shore became his lullaby. Whoosh, hush, whoosh, hush. The hammock rocked gently, matching the rhythm of the tide. Outside, the candle flickered one last time before going out completely, its tiny smoke trail curling like a dream. The moonlight filled the room fully, now soft, silver, endless. A small shell on his nightstand caught that moonlight and reflected it across the ceiling like a star. The glint pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of the sea itself. Larry cracked one eye open, just long enough to see it. He smiled, barely a movement, but it was there, peaceful, unguarded. "Good night, ocean," he murmured. The words were carried away by the faint breeze through the window. Outside, the waves answered with another hush. Inside, his breathing slowed, deep and steady, matching the rhythm of the world around him. The hammock swayed slower now, side to side, until it barely moved at all. The entire hut had grown still, except for the soft sound of the sea and the whisper of sand shifting outside. The moon climbed higher, casting long silver trails across the floor. The ocean shimmered. The stars drifted. And Larry the Lobster slept not with the heavy exhaustion of effort, but with the light, calm peace of understanding that rest is strength. The camera, if there were one, would slowly pan away from his window out across the quiet beach. Waves would roll in gentle rhythm. A lone jellyfish would float past, glowing faintly blue. The sea would breathe, endless and kind. Then, as the scene faded to soft blue, a final hush, the sound of peace settling in completely. The night had deepened, but it wasn't dark, not really. The sea glowed softly with moonlight, every ripple traced in silver. Larry's hut stood quiet and still, half-bathed in the pale shimmer of the ocean's reflection. He stirred awake, not fully, just enough to open one eye and glance at the window. The moon had drifted higher now, painting a faint line of light across his hammock. For a long moment, he didn't move. The rhythmic whoosh of waves outside was too soothing, too perfect to interrupt. But something about that sound calm, timeless, called to him again. It wasn't the call of energy or adventure this time. It was the quiet invitation of peace. Larry smiled sleepily and sat up, his muscles stretching and relaxing in slow motion. His body was still heavy from rest, but his mind felt light, like the tide itself had washed away every last worry. He reached for a seashell-covered lantern beside his bed. Its faint blue glow pulsed softly as he lifted it. Then, from a small wooden shelf, he picked up a thin book titled Legends of the Deep Current. Its cover was faded, the edges worn smooth by time and salt. It wasn't about strength or competition. It was a book of sea tales, the kind that spoke quietly about courage, patience, and the rhythm of nature. He turned toward the door and opened it slowly. The wooden frame creaked gently, the same warm sound that had greeted him earlier that night. The world outside was silent except for the ocean. The tide rolled in, sighed, and drifted back again. Stars sparkled in soft constellations across the surface, and the moon hung low, still steady, still bright. Larry stepped out onto the sand, the lantern light following him in a soft blue halo. He made his way to the same spot where he'd sat before, near the half-buried log that had become his favorite seat. The sand was cool beneath him as he sat down, settling the book on his lap. He rested the lantern beside it, and for a moment he simply looked around. The scene was alive, but gently so. Tiny fish glowed faintly as they darted through shallow water. A hermit crab scuttled across the sand, leaving a trail like a tiny script written by the sea. The waves moved with patient rhythm, each crest folding into another, never hurried. Larry smiled softly and whispered, "Perfect reading weather." He opened the book, the pages crackling quietly. The scent of salt and old paper rose up, something peaceful, something ancient. The first page told of the great reef guardian, a mythical sea creature said to protect sleeping coral colonies by calming the waters during the night. The story was simple, but Larry loved it. It spoke about the kind of strength that protected, not conquered, a quiet, steady strength that held the ocean's balance together. As he read, his eyes reflected the faint blue light of the lantern. The soft waves mirrored it, creating ripples of glowing reflections that danced across his shell. Every few moments he'd pause, not because he lost his place, but to watch the tide. The waves almost seemed to listen to him, moving in time with the slow rhythm of his voice when he read aloud. "And the reef guardian rested beneath the silver tide," he murmured, turning the page slowly, while the sea itself sang him to sleep. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting that line linger in his mind. The idea of the ocean, singing of something vast and strong, finding peace and stillness, struck him deeply. He looked up at the horizon again. The waves were endless, but each one carried the same message: movement without rush, power without noise. The wind picked up softly, tugging at the corner of a page. Larry smiled, pressing it down gently with his claw. All right, one more story," he said with a soft chuckle. He flipped the page again. This time, the story was about a starfish who tried to count every grain of sand before realizing that some things in life weren't meant to be measured, only felt. He laughed quietly at the thought. "Sounds like SpongeBob would have loved this one," he whispered. The waves answered with a soft hush, like laughter turned into music. He leaned back a little, letting his shoulders sink into the log, the book resting against his chest. The night's chill had turned comfortable, now cool, not cold. In that moment, it was as if the entire ocean had decided to slow its heartbeat just for him. The stars above shimmered, the waves hummed, and the light of the lantern pulsed in time with his breath. Larry took another deep, slow inhale and whispered, "This is what calm feels like." Larry turned another page, and the soft rustle sounded like a whisper under the night sky. The lantern's glow swayed gently beside him, its light flickering in time with the movement of the tide. The story on the next page was called The Coral Drifter. It told of a young sea creature who carried a piece of glowing coral across the ocean, guided not by maps, but by intuition, by trust in the current. Larry smiled as he read, feeling the story flow into him like the ocean breeze itself. He read softly aloud, his voice deep but tender. The drifter learned that not all strength comes from swimming against the waves sometimes. The current knows the way. He paused, looking up at the horizon. The ocean was still and vast. The stars mirrored across its surface so clearly it looked like he was sitting between two skies. His reflection in the wet sand shimmered faintly. Not proud, not posing, just there. Still, Larry leaned back and thought about how much of his life had been spent going against the current, pushing harder, lifting more, racing farther. It had made him who he was, sure. But now, sitting here, it felt like there was another kind of strength calling to him. He took a slow, deep breath. The salt air cooled his lungs as he exhaled. He glanced back down at the book, where a small sketch showed the coral drifter floating peacefully among glowing plankton. The art was simple, but it glowed faintly under the lantern's light, as though alive. Larry's voice dropped to a murmur. "Let the sea guide you." "Yeah, I get that now." He closed the book gently, holding his claw on the cover for a moment before reopening it again. Not to continue the story, but to rest on the page. He didn't want to rush it. The waves rolled closer, brushing against his claws where he sat. It didn't bother him, in fact. It felt right, like the ocean was leaning in to listen. The lantern's glow reflected off the water, creating streaks of light that danced across his arms and the pages of the book. The flickers of blue and gold made everything feel alive, as if the sea and sky were breathing together. A soft voice, or maybe just the wind, seemed to move through the air, whispering through the pages. It wasn't real speech, but it carried feeling, calm, patience, understanding. Larry smiled faintly, whispering back, "Yeah, I hear you." He flipped another page. This one showed a picture of an ancient underwater library carved into coral books made of shells and pearls, each containing memories of the sea itself. The story said that every current in the ocean carried a different song, a memory of where it had been. Larry ran his claw over the illustration, tracing the lines carefully. "Every current has a story," he said softly. "Guess we all do." He looked back at the water. The waves shimmered like soft ink lines drawn over glass. Somewhere out there, beyond what he could see, were thousands of currents, each one moving, flowing alive. And yet they all found their way home to the same sea. He realized then that his life was like that 2 years of motion, direction, energy, but it all flowed back here, to stillness. He exhaled slowly, setting the book down beside him. For a long moment, he didn't read. He just listened. The waves lapped softly against the shore. The sound of tiny bubbles rising through the tide echoed like quiet laughter. Somewhere far away, a whale's low hum rolled through the water, deep and soft, a sound you could feel in your chest more than hear. Larry closed his eyes and smiled. Good company tonight. The rhythm of the sea began to sync perfectly with his breathing inhale with the tide coming in, exhale as it rolled away. It felt like meditation, though he'd never called it that before. He just knew it made him calm in a way no gym ever could. He picked up the book again, flipped to the last story in the chapter, and read the final line aloud. "Even the strongest waves must rest when the moon is full." He looked up. The moon was full. Larry chuckled under his breath. "Guess I'm in good company then." He closed the book carefully this time, resting his claw over the cover as if thanking it. Then he set it down in the sand beside him, letting the tide gently brush against its edge. The water didn't harm it. It just shimmered there, reflecting the stars. Larry sat back and watched the horizon, quiet, content, at peace. The ocean had become his story now. The sound of waves grew slower, more rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. Larry stayed seated, his eyes half open, watching the horizon fade into deep blue. The sun had long disappeared, but its warmth lingered faintly in the air, a soft afterglow clinging to the edges of the clouds. He leaned back on both arms, feeling the cool sand under him. Every grain felt smooth, polished by time and tide. The air carried a scent of salt and driftwood. It was the kind of smell that instantly pulled memories from deep places, even the ones he didn't know were still there. The lantern beside him flickered again, casting a warm orange pool of light over the sand. It looked like a miniature sun, trying its best to hold its ground against the growing night. Larry smiled at it, thinking it was a little like himself still shining, even when the world had gone quiet. He picked up a small shell that had washed up near his claw. It was pearly white, its spiral catching tiny dots of light from the lantern. As he turned it in his hand, he could hear a faint whisper inside the eternal sound of the ocean echoing from within its hollow curve. "Funny," he murmured, "how the sea leaves its voice behind in everything it touches." He set the shell beside the book, both resting now like treasures found by accident. The tide rolled in gently, barely brushing against them. The stars above began to shimmer brighter, mirrored perfectly in the water's calm surface. It looked as though the sky had fallen, its pieces floating on the waves. Larry's eyes softened. "That's beautiful," he said to no one. But the sea seemed to answer anyway with a slow, gentle ripple. He could see his reflection now, calm eyes, relaxed shoulders, a faint smile. For once there was no tension in his muscles, no weight to lift, no goal to chase, just stillness. He thought about how rare this kind of peace was, how it didn't demand anything from him. No performance, no applause, just the permission to be. The longer he sat, the lighter he felt. It was as if the ocean was slowly untangling everything inside him, the stress, the pressure, the endless drive, all of it dissolving into the tide. The lantern flickered one last time and dimmed slightly. The wind had grown cooler now, brushing gently through his shell as if tucking him in. He adjusted his towel slightly, wrapping it over his shoulders like a blanket. The waves began to take on a silver glow, reflecting the rising moon in soft, moving patterns. The rhythm was hypnotic. With every breath, Larry's thoughts drifted a little further from the shore. He began to imagine the stories of the sea, the ancient sailors, the forgotten reefs, the quiet creatures who sang to the moon beneath the waves. His imagination painted the ocean with life, glowing plankton, drifting whales, tiny crabs building homes in coral shadows. Each image drifted through his mind like a dream, warm and weightless. Somewhere between thought and sleep, he heard a voice, gentle, familiar. It was the same tone he'd heard earlier in the pages of the book. "Even strength needs rest, Larry," it said softly, like a sigh in the breeze. He didn't move. He didn't question it. He simply smiled and nodded, whispering, "Yeah, I know." The sound of the tide seemed to swell in agreement. He turned his gaze toward the horizon once more. The moon hung low, silver light cascading across the surface of the water. It looked like a road, an endless glowing path leading out into the night. For a fleeting moment, he wondered what it would be like to walk on it, not as a bodybuilder or a lifeguard, but simply as Larry, a quiet part of the sea itself. He chuckled softly, maybe in another dream. The breeze carried his words out toward the water, where they dissolved into the sound of the waves. Larry leaned back, finally closing his eyes. The book rested at his side, unopened now, but still warm from his touch. The lantern hummed faintly, its glow growing softer, blending perfectly with the silver moonlight. He wasn't asleep, not yet, but he was drifting. Each breath matched the motion of the sea. Each thought became lighter. Each sound faded into calm. The water reached his feet and lingered there, cool and gentle, as if to remind him he was part of something far bigger, something alive, infinite, and kind. Larry whispered one last time, his voice barely audible, "Good night, ocean." And as the tide pulled slowly back, it almost sounded like the sea whispered back, "Good night, Larry." The night was completely still now, a velvet silence stretched across Goo Lagoon. Only the soft murmur of waves and the steady rhythm of Larry's breathing broke the quiet. The moon had climbed higher, painting the sand in silver streaks and turning every seashell into a tiny, glowing gem. Larry's lantern flickered one last time before settling into a faint, steady glow. Its light barely reached his claws now, but that didn't matter. His eyes were closed, and his mind had already begun to drift somewhere beyond the shoreline, somewhere between the water and the sky. In his dreams, the ocean was endless. The horizon shimmered like liquid glass, and the stars floated closer, as though they were dipping into the water just to rest beside him. He could feel the coolness of the tide wrapping around his legs, tugging gently, like an old friend saying, "Come float with me." The Larry of the dream wasn't lifting weights, wasn't posing, wasn't chasing records. He was simply standing in the shallows, watching the stars ripple across the surface. His reflection stretched and shimmered, one with the current. He smiled that calm, content smile that comes only when there's nothing left to prove. A small jellyfish drifted past, glowing softly, its tentacles trailing like threads of moonlight. Larry reached out to it. It pulsed gently in response, leaving a faint sparkle on his claw like a blessing. All around him, the sea began to hum. Not in words, not in melody, but in feeling. The kind of hum that lives deep in the bones of the world, a sound that says, "You are safe. You are home." The dream shifted, and suddenly he was walking along the ocean floor. Each step left ripples of gold behind him. Schools of fish passed like moving lanterns, illuminating the coral towers that rose like ancient temples. He passed by one that looked strangely familiar. It was shaped like a dumbbell, overgrown with coral and seaweed. He laughed softly. Even here, the sea remembered who he was, but instead of feeling pressure, he felt gratitude. He placed a hand on it and whispered, "Thank you for helping me grow." A current swept past him, swirling gently around his body, carrying away every last bit of tension from his shell, every trace of exhaustion. He floated upward, weightless, rising slowly toward the moonlit surface above. The moment his head broke through the water, he found himself back on the beach. The line between dream and waking had vanished completely. The stars were brighter now, and the air was cooler, but the calm inside him remained. Larry was still seated where he had been, the open book resting beside him, pages fluttering in the night breeze. The lantern's flame had gone out, yet its glass still glowed faintly, as if holding on to the warmth of his peace. He opened his eyes halfway, gaze unfocused, caught between sleep and waking. The sea stretched endlessly in front of him, its surface smooth and dark like a mirror. He could see both the stars above and their reflections below, a perfect symmetry of the world, as if heaven and ocean had agreed to meet halfway. He took a deep, slow breath. The air was cool, tinged with salt and starlight. Each inhale filled his chest with calm. Each exhale carried away whatever little weight remained. Larry's head tilted slightly toward his shoulder, and with that gentle motion, he gave in to rest completely. His breathing slowed, matching the rhythm of the sea. The tide crept in again, brushing lightly against his claws and retreating with a whisper. It was almost as if the sea was rocking him to sleep. And as he drifted into full slumber, the scene widened the beach, glowing faintly under the stars, the soft crash of waves like the steady heartbeat of the world. In the far distance, Goo Lagoon lay silent. No crowds, no workouts, no noise, only peace. The camera, or viewer's eye, slowly pulled back, revealing Larry as a small, calm figure against the vast moonlit expanse of the ocean. The waves shimmered gently, and the stars above seemed to pulse in sync with his breath. Finally, everything blurred together, the moonlight, the tide, the calm rise and fall of the water, until it was all one soothing, endless rhythm. And then, like a soft sigh, the screen faded to deep blue. A final line appeared in the silence of the sea breeze. Even the strongest waves need their rest. The sound of the tide continued faintly for a few seconds more, until the world of Goo Lagoon dissolved into dream. The night had wrapped Goo Lagoon in a silver calm. Waves whispered softly. The moon's reflection danced across the water, and the stars shimmered like scattered pearls on velvet. Larry lay against the sand, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. He had crossed that gentle line between waking and dreaming, now carried fully into the sea's lullaby. The dream began quietly, as all peaceful dreams do. At first, there was only the sound of water, distant, deep, and soft. Then light began to bloom beneath him. Ribbons of pale blue and gold swirling together, wrapping around his body like drifting silk. He was no longer lying on the shore. He was floating, weightless, in the middle of the sea. The water was warm and endless. Above him, the surface shimmered like liquid glass. Below him, the ocean stretched into soft gradients of light. Tiny bubbles rose and burst like glowing stars, forming trails that followed him wherever he drifted. Larry looked down at his claws. They glowed faintly, as if the sea itself had filled them with light. His muscles felt light, unburdened. The ache of training, the pressure to be strong, all of it, had dissolved into the water. A familiar voice echoed softly through the waves, but not in words and feeling. It was the ocean's voice, calm and patient. It said, "You have done enough. Rest now." Larry smiled. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. A smile was enough. A school of glowing fish passed by, leaving faint trails of color that weaved around him like threads of a dream. He reached out, and they swirled around his arm, playful and gentle. The light they carried seemed alive, as if it knew he needed peace. Far ahead, he saw the silhouette of coral towers rising like mountains. They glowed faintly in hues of pink and turquoise, each pulse in sync with his heartbeat. As he drifted closer, he realized the coral wasn't just alive, it was singing. Not in notes, but in vibrations that he could feel in his chest, soft, soothing, rhythmic, like the slow beat of waves against the shore. He floated between them, letting the sound guide him. Every pulse, every hum seemed to wash something away. Tension, worry, noise, until there was nothing left but stillness. A jellyfish drifted close, glowing white-blue under the moonlight, filtering through the surface. It pulsed gently, each movement sending ripples through the water. Larry reached out, and the jellyfish brushed against his claw. The touch left a faint light behind, like a soft mark of peace. He looked up. The moon above shone brighter now, enormous, round and full. Its light pierced through the water, turning it into liquid silver. He could see his reflection faintly again, calm, weightless, completely at ease. The water carried him slowly upward. The coral faded behind him, replaced by open water, and a horizon that seemed to stretch forever. He wasn't swimming. The sea was moving him, like a gentle hand guiding him home. Somewhere above, faint sounds began to blend into the dream, the whisper of the tide, the distant hum of the wind, and the quiet heartbeat of the ocean itself. Larry closed his eyes, letting the light and sound merge. The sea around him began to glow, brighter, soft golden light filling the water, as though dawn was arriving beneath the waves. He could see fragments of memory in the glow, small, warm moments. SpongeBob waving at him from the shore, Sandy laughing as they lifted weights together, the peaceful view of Goo Lagoon at sunset. Each one shimmered and faded, replaced by another, a slideshow of simple happiness. He wasn't sad to see them drift away. He simply watched, grateful. The last image that remained was the ocean itself, vast, kind, infinite. Its glow surrounded him completely until there was no up, no down, only light and peace. Larry whispered softly, though his voice was carried only by thought. "Thank you." The light pulsed once, bright and slow, as if answering him, and then gently faded to deep blue. The dream settled into silence. Larry floated perfectly still, the rhythm of the sea now his own heartbeat. The waves outside the dream rolled softly over the sand, the moonlight glimmering on their crests. The camera, or vision, slowly panned back, rising above Goo Lagoon. From high above, the beach was just a curve of pale sand under silver light. The ocean stretched endlessly, calm and glowing, as if holding its strongest protector safely in its arms. Then, with the faintest echo of the tide, everything faded into soft blue darkness. A final whisper, calm, steady, eternal. Even the strongest hearts find peace in quiet waves. The sound of the sea continued, slow and steady, until silence became the lullaby itself. The dream didn't end where the last wave faded, it simply shifted. The ocean around Larry grew deeper, darker, softer, yet somehow brighter from within. The light no longer came from the moon, but from the water itself, glowing faintly like a breathing sky. He floated without effort, arms slightly outstretched, as if the sea had taken full care of him. Each movement sent a gentle ripple of golden light flowing outward. The silence was alive, not empty, but full of presence. Larry's eyes moved slowly through the quiet blue. Around him, ribbons of light curled upward like threads of smoke. The water carried echoes, faint sounds of laughter, distant music, the heartbeat of waves against the shore. They weren't real memories, but they felt like home. He drifted closer to the seafloor. It wasn't barren or cold. It shimmered with glowing sand, tiny shells blinking like starlight beneath him. Coral arches stretched overhead, soft and rounded like doorways to other dreams. He passed through one and found himself in a wide clearing beneath the sea. The water was perfectly still here, suspended in eternal calm. In the center stood a small rock covered in gentle moss, glowing faintly. He landed on it lightly, feet sinking an inch into the soft coral surface. The ocean was quiet, almost waiting. Then a pulse of light rose from beneath his feet, slow, steady, warm, spreading outward like a heartbeat through the sea. Larry blinked. The rhythm matched his own pulse. For a long moment, he just breathed, or at least something like breathing a deep, silent rhythm that flowed through him and the water alike. His body glowed faintly, every heartbeat releasing a small wave of light. It was peaceful, like exhaling for the first time after holding it in for years. Above him, the water shimmered. Shapes began to form in the light silhouettes of friends, faint and dreamlike. SpongeBob's laugh echoed faintly. Sandy's voice saying, "Take it easy, big guy." Patrick snoring softly somewhere in the distance. Larry smiled. None of them were really there, not in the waking sense, but they existed here in the warmth of memory. The sea had a way of keeping everyone close. He looked upward again. The moon was no longer just a reflection. It was right there above him, enormous and glowing through the waves, close enough to touch. He raised one claw, brushing against its light. It rippled through the water like silk. The ocean seemed to breathe with him now, a shared inhale and exhale. Each wave above rolled in perfect rhythm with his pulse. For the first time in a long while, Larry didn't feel like he was part of the ocean. He was the ocean. The current whispered softly round him, carrying faint trails of golden bubbles. They drifted upward like lanterns, lighting his face as they passed. The sensation was soothing, as if the sea itself were thanking him for his strength, for his patience, for finally allowing himself to rest. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, colors still moved, soft blues, golds, greens, all glowing, shifting, breathing together. The voice of the ocean returned, not as sound this time, but as a thought that seemed to rise from inside him. Even strength needs softness. He let out a quiet laugh. "You're right," he whispered. "Guess I'm finally getting that." The words dissolved into the water, spreading outward in small ripples that reached every corner of the dream. Somewhere far away, a whale sang low, deep, and ancient. Its sound was vast and peaceful, carrying across the sea like a promise. Larry listened, eyes still closed, feeling the vibrations move through his shell, through his heart, through everything. He was no longer floating alone. He was surrounded not by people, but by presence, the living heartbeat of the world. The scene slowly began to glow brighter. The stars above seemed to fall, their light mingling with the sea until there was no sky or water, only an endless field of glowing blue. Larry was drifting in it, at peace, surrounded by warmth and quiet power. He whispered one last time, almost in a sigh. "Feels right." The light pulsed once more, slow and calm, like the sea's gentle nod of approval. And then the dream deepened again, pulling him further, softer, into the heart of rest. The dream drifted into its quietest form, a stillness so deep it felt like time itself had slowed to a heartbeat. Larry floated weightlessly, surrounded by nothing but soft blue light and the rhythmic hum of the ocean's breath. The water had grown warmer, smoother, its glow dimming into a peaceful dusk beneath the waves. The moon above was gone now, replaced by a faint silvery shimmer that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Larry couldn't tell if he was rising or sinking, and it didn't matter. Every direction felt safe. Every motion was gentle. He opened his eyes slowly, but the world was already a blur of light and calm. The outlines of the ocean had vanished, replaced by soft shapes that looked like memories painted in light, SpongeBob laughing in the shallows, Sandy floating on a surfboard, Patrick waving lazily from the beach. They weren't real, not anymore. They were echoes, reflections of the moments that had made his heart lighter. Each image glowed for a second, then dissolved into the water. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like peace, as if the sea was telling him, "These memories are safe now." Larry smiled faintly. His voice, though quiet, carried through the water like a ripple. "Guess I'm not alone after all." The ocean answered with a low hum, a deep vibration that wrapped around him like a blanket. He could feel it in his chest, in the rhythm of his heartbeat. It was the same pulse he'd heard since the dream began. Steady, forgiving, eternal. He realized then that the sea wasn't just around him. It was him. Every thought, every breath, every moment of silence, all connected, part of the same gentle flow. Larry tilted his head upward. Above him, light filtered softly, shimmering in slow motion. It looked like a sunrise beneath the sea rays of gold and rose cutting through the blue, forming a path that seemed to lead somewhere beyond sight. He didn't swim. He didn't even move. The water itself carried him upward effortlessly, as if the sea wanted to lift him closer to that light. His body felt lighter than it ever had on land. His shell, his muscles, his weight, all of it, had become pure energy, floating freely. He reached out one claw, brushing against the light as he rose. The moment he touched it, it pulsed warmly, sending a wave of calm through him. Every thought quieted, every sound softened. It was as if the universe had taken one deep, peaceful breath. The light grew brighter, but never harsh. It filled him instead, seeping into every corner of his being, washing away everything but warmth. Larry's eyes fluttered closed, and in the dark behind them, he saw waves made of gold, stars made of sound, and the faint outline of Goo Lagoon glowing gently beneath the moon. He whispered softly, half dreaming, "Home." And the sea answered back, not in words, but in feeling always. A final current of warm water drifted past, swirling around him like a soft goodbye. It carried glowing bubbles that floated upward, each one holding a faint flicker of memory laughter, sunlight, salt air, the rhythm of waves hitting the gym walls at sunset. They rose until they disappeared into the endless light above. Larry's body slowly descended back toward the ocean floor, where a bed of glowing sand waited for him. He landed softly, the water still pulsing in slow waves of gold and blue around him. His breathing, or whatever replaced it here, grew slower, quieter, almost imperceptible. The world began to fade into deeper shades of blue. The coral glowed faintly one last time, the fish moved slower, and even the hum of the sea turned into silence. The camera, or viewer's perspective, began to pull back slowly, reverently. Larry's resting form became smaller and smaller amid the vast, peaceful expanse of the ocean. Above, the faint curve of the moon shimmered again, its reflection glowing faintly across the waves. There were no words now, no sound but the faint, steady whisper of the tide. The ocean glowed once softly, like a heartbeat, and then everything faded into darkness. A final line appeared, drifting slowly across the calm blue screen, and in the quiet of the waves, even strength dreams. The sound of the ocean lingered a few moments longer, slow, rhythmic, infinite, before dissolving into silence. "Good night,"